Is the New York Jets offensive line, this newly constructed group, are they a top 10 unit in the NFL going into the 2024 season? One analyst says yes. We'll dissect that right now on a Monday edition of Football with Faria.
It's time for Football with Faria.
You got to get the offense right, and you got to be able to be aggressive. They put up 14 against the secondary. That is driving me up a freaking wall right now.
Now here's your host, Nick Faria.
All right, welcome inside Football with Faria, this Monday edition. For those of you in New York watching, for those of you in Jersey or just on the East Coast, welcome. I hope all of you are safe from the 72, 96 hours of insanity that have plagued the East Coast with an earthquake and now an eclipse. I've been inside my house all day, so I did not see the eclipse. But I was certainly in my house for the earthquake. Listen, of all the things that I could have expected during my time of unemployment, if you will, earthquakes were not at the top of my list. I have a rule where I don't go to the West Coast under any circumstances because I'm big on staying safe from the San Andreas Fault, and earthquakes, not really my thing. I can handle blizzards. I can handle tropical storms. I can handle all that kind of stuff. I cannot handle earthquakes. I was highly uncomfortable throughout that entire day on Friday. Just absolute insanity. Thursday, Friday, whatever it was. But absolute insanity. The fact that, first off, I just learned that New Jersey is actually on a fault line. Had no idea that was the case. So that was fun news to learn. Good God. Can't stand it. Cannot stand earthquakes. That's just number one on my list. Can't do it. Will not do it. Absolutely no patience for it. If the ground below me is shaking, I want out immediately. Immediately. No questions asked. I'll handle 10 degrees, negative 10 degrees, all that I'll handle. Not an earthquake. Not when the ground below me is shaking. Just absolute insanity. But we have to talk football. We got to talk football. That's what we do here. And there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we have the NFL draft coming up in a few weeks. I'm still working with you guys to make sure I'm either doing a draft stream or I'll be reporting from One Jets Drive. One or the other is going to happen. Not really sure which yet, but one of them is going to happen. I will say that I would love to do a live stream. I will keep all of you updated. However, if it's specifically between that or reporting, I will gladly take the reporting side, as I'm sure you guys are aware. And yes, I see a comment from Dane. Absolutely. For those of you newcomers jumping on for the show for the first time, like, share, subscribe, do all the things you need to do to follow the channel. Any help is appreciated. Got about 114 people watching right now, so that is obviously greatly, greatly appreciated. But let's talk about the Jets. I didn't know what I was going to talk about when it came to New York for a good 6 hours today. I was really stumped. I didn't have an article done. I was trying to figure out what we were going to talk about. And then it plopped on my desk on the analytical department, on the analytical side of the National Football League, that detailed what the projected offensive lines will be for each team and ranking those projections. And the Jets ranking, again, projected rankings before the draft happens, before the end of free agency, going into training camp, before any injuries are suffered. The Jets are projected to have the 10th best offensive line in football. That's above the New York Giants, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Teams that over the last 2 years maybe struggled last year, but were in the postseason and actually won a playoff game here and there. I'll ask you guys, for those of you in the chat, do you believe at full strength, meaning all five are healthy, a full 17-game season, do you believe the Jets' offensive line is a top 10 unit in the National Football League. And I think, as you guys have given me your opinions, I just want to give mine. When people judge offensive lines, it's very difficult because there are obviously great players along every line. There's great players everywhere. The New England Patriots have a terrible, terrible offensive line. Michael Onwenu is a very good player. He is the exception to the rule. But one great offensive lineman does not make up for 4 bad ones. And that's why the Patriots have been bad now since Tom Brady has left. Onwenu is the only good guy they got. The Buffalo Bills, I would project as sort of a mediocre, above average offensive line. Deion Dawkins is really good. Osiris Torrance, solid player. 2 to 3 guys that are really good. But I'll give you another example. The San Francisco 49ers. Their offensive line, top to bottom, isn't very good. Their top guy, obviously Trent Williams, is a Hall of Famer. And he makes that entire offense go, as we saw in both the Super Bowl and the entire regular season last year. But it's essentially Trent Williams and a bunch of other guys. There's no main crew. The top offensive lines in football, to me, consistently, are teams like Philadelphia, Kansas City, teams that have multiple Pro Bowlers, multiple All-Pros. And if you're the Jets having this conversation about your own offensive line, again, expected that they are fully healthy. Top to bottom, starting 5, how many left tackles are better than Tyron Smith right now in the NFL when Tyron's at full strength? Maybe 3, maybe. I'll take Jordan Mailata, Trent Williams. I'll throw Andrew Thomas in there because I really like Thomas's game. But even then, he's right around that mark. But Tyron Smith's a top 5 player at his position still to this day when he's 100%. Morgan Moses, as right tackles go, he's not Lane Johnson, but he is an above average to elite right tackle. He's graded out consistently well over the years. So by that metric, if you look at the tackles and you want to compare them back and forth, the Jets are in a unique position that they have 2 elite players on both sides of the offensive line. And obviously, we all know this, but that's going to help Aaron Rodgers and his longevity. But also, it's going to help Breece Hall. You don't have to pressure Breece into 25, 30 touches a game. You can matriculate the ball down the field without force feeding it to a top player like Hall is. Having balance in your offense is so important. A lot of teams have it. Some teams miss it. The Jets have been woefully incompetent in that regard. But now with this offensive line, again, this is not me saying it, guys. There was a study done based on the starting 5 projected, and they were ranked in the top 10. They were ranked 10th. That's pretty damn good. And listen, as of right now, you have to tip your cap to Joe Douglas when it comes to that. Douglas took over an offensive line that was anemic. He struggled to find the players to fit the bill of solving the offensive line. He has struggled for years on it. No one denies it. But this offseason really feels like the first time that the Jets not only have a plan for this upcoming season, but have a plan in what kind of offense they want to run with the offensive line fully together. They can run zone schemes, but in reality, you look at this line, the way John Simpson plays at left guard, the way Elijah Vera-Tucker can play, the way Tyron Smith has dominated for a decade, this is a group that's going to run downhill. Downhill. Not only is that a perfect scheme fit for Breece Hall, but it's a perfect scheme fit for Aaron Rodgers. That's why I say the Jets should probably look to sign a free agent running back. Just give yourself a little extra depth at the position. But ultimately, I look at this Jets offensive line from top to bottom, And I struggle to find 5 players on a single unit as good as all 5 are for the Jets. Philadelphia, yes. I'll give you Buffalo because they have the continuity. I'll give you continuity matters. We saw that last year. It matters 100%. The Kansas City Chiefs, same exact premise. But if we're being honest about what makes a good offensive line, not just being about dominance, but being about leaders and working together cohesively, this is as good as it's going to get. And it's as good as a lot of offensive linemen are going to get. There's not many groups that can confidently throw out a future Hall of Famer in Tyron Smith, multiple Pro Bowlers in Morgan Moses and Elijah Vera Tucker, a young stud in Joe Tippmann, and the guy that's, I would say, average in John Simpson. The time to win is now for the Jets. We said this last week after the Stephon Diggs trade. We said this last week. The time is now. But many people that argued against it, many people that thought the Jets would not be able to compete, is because their offensive line won't be healthy or isn't as good as many people think. But in reality, if we're looking at the totality of this group, even the analytics say this is a really damn good offensive line. Damn good offensive line. If you guys want to call in here, Football with Faria on a Monday evening, the link in the YouTube description down below. Try to answer all your questions as well throughout today's program. I have one question here from Sham. Will the Bills be as healthy at the O-line as last year, though? And Sham brings up a very nice point. He brings up an interesting point because last year, the Buffalo Bills, they dealt with a lot of issues injury-wise. But if we're looking at them from the offensive line perspective, they were relatively healthy. And they were far more healthy than the New York Jets. That's, obvious. The injury luck has to turn sometimes. And I think Robert Saleh understands that his practice regimen is going to have to change. He has done so far to this point. And now the question is, can the starting 5 stay healthy? I'm going to get to this point a little bit in the NFL when we talk about the NFL draft. But if we're discussing the Jets offensive line and we're discussing them just from the basis of, is this a top 10 group? The obvious answer is yes. But the bigger question is, how much better will they be if they were to draft an offensive lineman with the 10th overall pick? An Olu Fashanu, Talise Fuaga, trade back for Troy Fautanu. How much better, depth-wise, will that group be when they have a transcendent talent that they selected with the 10th overall pick without having to worry about anything? You would have your tackle situation solved for the next decade if it's Olu Fashanu. Something to think about. We'll get into the debate as well later on, as I said. But we do have a caller here, and of course, it's Johnny. Johnny, how's everything going, man?
Hey, what's going on, bro? How you holding up, man? Hopefully everything was all right with everything.
Everything was fine.
Any zombies out there? Any zombie apocalypse?
For an earthquake.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
Dude, it was. I mean, I still got family out on Long Island and everything, and they were telling me, they were like, they said the aftershock is they felt it a lot more compared to the first one or whatever it was.
I never felt the aftershock. I felt the earthquake, and I'm sitting there, and my body is shaking. I hear, because we have a bar cart. The bar cart is like rumbling, and I feel the couch I'm sitting on moving, and I'm like, what the hell is this? What is this?
That might be what it took for us to have the Mets be 3-0 right now and World Series back on.
Listen, it would be true for the Mets to win a series against the Reds, where they looked terrible for most of the games, go into Atlanta and get their asses handed to them on a platter. I don't think anyone is looking at this series positively, at least right now, because they've shown nothing. Unless outside of their starting pitching, they've shown nothing.
And you know what sucks, man? I literally watch every single game of the Mets, and I just get pissed off. Put myself through it.
Did we lose Johnny?
No, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
Oh, there you go. You jumped off there for a little bit.
Oh, that was weird. But
Keep
hey,
going. Yeah, you get pissed off with the Mets. I completely understand. I, like you, because I have a lot of time in my hands, I watch every game now, follow along on my phone if I can. It blows my mind how a team spends so much money on defense is so unbelievably bad at defense.
and the defense looks horrible. That's what's
Oh,
so crazy, and it's the inside defense too. At
yeah.
that, you know,
Brett
we
Beatty
could be
hasn't
hit.
been a problem. People were arguing about Brett Beatty. Could he play third base? Is he done as a prospect? He's looked pretty damn good. But you've got Joey Wendell botching ground balls. You've got the center. You got Tyrone Thompson, whatever it is, Tyrone Taylor, whatever the hell his name is, in left field, unable to track a fly ball that brings in 3 runs. I mean, it's just a joke.
And it's crazy. Is I was really worried about the bullpen, and our bullpen has not been that bad. The pitching hasn't been that
The
bad.
pitching's been great. It's been great.
So it's just, I don't know. But anyways, we'll be here and start having another earthquake in a moment if we keep going. But I had a question, right? Kind of was talking a little bit about this earlier. Let's just say with the trade scenario, right? Because it's something I don't think anybody's really talked about. And we go back and we trade and we get a second round pick as well, right? So we're picking in the late 20s. Let's just go ahead and say that, right? You have Alan McConkey. He's there. Pull the trigger. Let's go ahead and get him, right?
Man,
Second round.
Lad McConkey with Aaron Rodgers. That's scary. If I'm a defensive coordinator in the AFCs, I'm scared shitless about that.
That's what I mean. So, like, let's just say that, right? And then second round, and Xavier Legette. I'm big on Legette. I think he's gonna be a monster. I love the way he runs, man. You know. So, but anyways, he's there in the second round. We get another wide receiver, and then third, fourth, yes, do the tackles and the guards. Does a talent drop by a lot? Yes, and I get that part of it, right? But what if, again, I trust JD. I believe in what he does, but we go that route. Give Aaron Rodgers something that the Green Bay Packers have never given him, which is top wide receivers. And he just makes him look. I mean, imagine Lad McConkey with Aaron Rodgers and Xavier Legette with Aaron Rodgers. Then you have Garrett Wilson.
Johnny, I got to be honest with you. They're not taking receivers back to back. That's just not going to happen. They're either taking one at 10 or they're trading back for one, accumulating another pick, and then double dipping an offensive line. If they're going to double dip, it's not going to be a receiver now with Mike Williams.
Got it. But that's what I mean. Mike Williams is only on a 1-year thing, right?
Yep.
And that's why you get your Legette that I feel like is the Mike Williams replacement, right? Same size. He's big as crap as well, too. And kind of go for there. I'm now hypothetical. Listen,
this is what we've got the draft in 3 weeks. It's all hypothetical until then.
So imagine that. I mean, are we nuts? Am I nuts for thinking that? You kind of said already yes, but
Listen, Johnny. I appreciate the call as always. Listen, and again, like I said, this is the time to speculate. This is the time to throw out the outlandish mocks because no one knows what's going on. Teams are trying to get a little one leg up on the competition. We saw one particular instance of this with Malik Neighbors. What was it? The Sportskeeda, whatever it was, Tony Pauline essentially said that there were character concerns around Malik Neighbors. Jordan Schultz, I think, was a little bit more experienced as an NFL reporter, came out, squashed it, and said, we do this every year with these guys. The only reason why this comes out is so that a team is able to watch him fall into their lap. Maybe it was the Jets that started that rumor. I'm not going to sit here and speculate on that. But this is the time for the outlandish takes. This is the time to either make or break you as a prospect, but also a time for organizations to try and get a leg up on the competition. With the Jets, they were in a very unique situation. They have a Hall of Fame quarterback. Very few teams have. They have a Hall of Fame left tackle, a star wide receiver, a star corner, and a pass rush that is already loaded. There are very few positions of true need for the Jets this year. Very few true needs. They have a need at safety. They need another running back. They could go for another receiver, but they have the depth along the offensive line. Whether you like them or not, Carter Warren, Max Mitchell are the backup tackles right now, and you have Wes Schweitzer, who's the backup in the interior. You have 3 quality backups. That's normally the average. Most teams trust 8 guys that can go in and start in a second. Philadelphia has, I think, 8, maybe 9, depending. If you're the Jets and you're with the 10th pick, you have a decision to make on which position of value do you want to address. You're not taking a running back at 10. You're not taking a safety at 10. You're not taking a linebacker. You're not taking a corner. It is essentially wide receiver, offensive line, or quarterback. Those 3 in that order. Because if Romeo Odunze falls at 10, I think it's safe to assume the pick is going to be Odunze as of right now. If Odunze goes to Chicago and 3 receivers are taken in the top 9 and they don't trade up, Olu Fashanu is going to be available. He'll fall in the lap of the Jets, and you could get your left tackle, your starting left tackle for the next decade, while also making sure that the offensive line stays elite, even if something happens to Tyron Smith. There's a lot of ways they can go. There's a lot of different paths they can go. And we could talk about the draft and everything going on. And, of course, this is the time where rumors are going to run rampant. I will challenge every one of you watching today's show. Don't jump in to the stress of rumors coming out about certain prospects and everything else. If a player can play, the team will draft him. Plain and simple. The only exception to the rule this year, and I say exception because it really is an exception, is the Texas defensive tackle Tyron Sweat. Devondre Sweat, arrested for DWI, absolute horrific. You don't do that 3 weeks before the NFL draft when you already have questions about your character. That just looks terrible. I think he could fall outside of the first 2 rounds. Maybe he doesn't, but when you have character concerns like that and you prove those concerns right, that's a problem. That's a problem that's going to stay with him for a little bit now. It absolutely will. It's just, it's one of those things where we look and we see the organization that the Jets have, and they look at what they're trying to do on draft night, and there are 3 positions that they could value because there's no other positions of need. We talk about it all the time. The 5 true positions of value: 5, quarterback, wide receiver, left tackle, pass rusher, corner. Those are the 5 you need solved in order to be a Super Bowl contender. Those are the 5. If that's the case, the Jets have all 5 locked and loaded, ready to go for next season. Ready to go. That allows you to take the best player available. And why I say a quarterback has to be on the table. If Drake May falls to 10, there has to be a legitimate conversation for the Jets about selecting this kid from North Carolina. I have him as the best quarterback in this class. I love everything about him. He's got a good attitude, great arm, athletic, good pocket awareness, strong accuracy. Obviously needs to fine-tune those things. His footwork needs to be fine-tuned, but that's what happens when you go into the NFL. He's not coming in and starting week 1. I think it's a mistake if any of these guys start week 1 because you're setting them up for failure. CJ Stroud is an outlier. He came into a great system with really good players, with a really good coaching staff, and it just completely blew the scene up in Houston. How many quarterbacks do that in the NFL now? particularly coming from the top 5. They don't, because they're not nurtured enough. They are not giving the time to progress as athletes, learning the game. The biggest mistake the Jets made, we talk about getting rid of Sam Darnold when they drafted Zach Wilson and the Zach Wilson pick in general. I would argue Zach Wilson, not a very good football player. Clearly, the reason why, because he's got bad footwork, the arm talent's inconsistent, and he doesn't have good anticipation. But is that the case if the Jets allow him to sit and be nurtured at the beginning of his career? Give him the opportunity to learn the game under a veteran. What was so bad about doing that? The Jets essentially said the same thing. The entire end of the year, Robert Saleh was saying, I wish we did things differently with Zach. Paraphrasing, of course, but there are some things we look back at and said we should do differently. The Jets have to learn from their mistakes. And by learning from their mistakes means if Drake May falls at 10, now you have arguably the best quarterback of this draft class. One of the best in this draft class. To sit behind a Hall of Fame quarterback. You would do what the Packers did with Jordan Love, and you set him up for success. That would be the ultimate smart move by Joe Douglas. And I'm not saying it's going to happen because I personally think the quarterback that's going to fall a little bit is J.J. McCarthy. I think he falls to 5. He's not getting to 10. None of these quarterbacks are going to get to 10. But some people are projecting it. And if it happens that Drake May falls to 10, the Jets should absolutely go after him. Or at least have a very genuine conversation about it. Because these kind of passers do not come around often. They just don't. Question here from VR Diesel. But again, appreciate it, man. I saw you jump on today. Who do you think is the most likely trade partner if JD trades back? The Raiders, Indy, Cincy, and for what realistically? So this is an interesting one because I see a lot of Jet fans now. They debate amongst themselves on Twitter about what it would cost to trade back in the first round, but also trying to accumulate a second-round pick. A lot of people say if you trade back with Indy, Minnesota, Denver, you're not going to get enough to warrant a second-round pick. And for a lot of those cases, I would tend to agree. You're not getting a second-round pick if you're trading back into the teens. I can't see them acquiring a second-round pick. The value isn't there. But if we're talking about late 20s, I think that's certainly up for debate. The Buffalo Bills are very, very desperate for a young wide receiver. They're probably not going to be willing to trade up for one because they don't want to give away their draft capital, especially now that Stephon Diggs is gone. But there are other receiver-needy teams. There are other offensive line-needy teams. You talk about the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys are picking what, 23rd, 24th in the NFL this year? They're picking mid to late first round. If you're the Jets and you can pick up a second-round pick for the Cowboys and drop back to the 23, 24 overall slot, wouldn't that make a lot of sense? Wouldn't that work out for everyone? They would be able to get their offensive linemen. They would be able to still draft Troy Fautanu if you're the Jets, accumulate a second-round pick, and you can get a guy, as Johnny said, like Xavier Legette, who I look at on tape and I see A.J. Brown all over again. This guy looks exactly the play style, everything about it. Absolutely A.J. Brown. I'm going through here because I want to look this up and I want to make sure I have it. But essentially, and I have, yes, okay, so this makes sense. We talk about value, guys, right? We talk about value, making sure everything's the right pick. The value of getting the Cowboys' first and second round pick for the 10th overall would be enticing, but it still wouldn't be enough because the Cowboys pick in the later portion of the second round. That's solid value. That's solid value, but it's not good enough. The team that I continue to look at, and maybe it's because I'm a fan of them. I've talked about them on this show plenty of times. But if you want to talk about value and getting equal value in trades, the Jets with the 10th pick, if you're looking for a team to trade back with, it's Philadelphia. It's absolutely Philadelphia. Because Philly has 2 picks in the second round. They have one at 50 and I think 53. I'm looking at the value chart right now. 50 and 53, yes. They have the 22nd overall pick. The value of the 22nd overall pick is $780 right now. The 50th pick is $400. The 53rd is $370. The Jets' 10th overall pick right now is valued at $1,300. If you are New York and you are looking for a trade partner, getting the 22nd overall pick, getting the 50th would put you at around $1,300. Would put you around there. If you go to the 53rd overall pick, it's almost dead even. So, if you're Philadelphia, do you make this trade? I think there's certainly merit for it. Philadelphia needs offensive line help. They need cornerback help. They are enamored with Quinion Mitchell. They're enamored with a lot of these young quarterbacks. They also need an edge rusher. Obviously, duh. If Philadelphia is willing to part with a second-round pick and the 22nd for the 10th overall pick, maybe that's enough to entice Joe Douglas to trade back, pick up Troy Fautanu, and then go into the second round and get a quality receiver in round 2. That would make a lot of sense. That would make a lot of sense. And again, I'm prefacing this here. This is not what I'm hearing. There's no report tied to this. It is merely speculation. Speculation overall. But to show you guys what I'm talking about, and this is, I see a lot in the chat, so I'm trying to go through it. So Dane mentions Vegas or Cincinnati. Let's play this game. If you're trading back with the Raiders right now have the 13th overall pick, valued about 200 points less than the Jets. You are not picking up a second-round pick if you are trading back to the Raiders. You're not. It's just not going to happen. He mentioned also Cincinnati. So let's look at Cincinnati. 900. So the value at the first round pick is 900. Trying to find their second. Struggling to find it. Maybe they don't have a second. No, they do. 49th overall pick. So 900. Cincinnati, 49th pick, 410. Maybe Cincinnati at 18 makes a lot of sense. Maybe they do. That's around the same. But I'm going to say, again, with all this speculation that we're doing, and again, this is the fun part of this. There's no ties to it. It's just merely guesswork at this time because executives are working the phone. People are trying to trade up. A lot of what the Jets are going to do on draft night, the options that they will have are predicated on other deals being done. What I mean by that is if Minnesota trades into the top 5, and takes J.J. McCarthy, which I think a lot of people are expecting. If they trade up for 5 for McCarthy, you're going to have your pick of either the best offensive lineman potentially available, Olu Fashanu, Talise Fuaga. You're going to have the option of Brock Bowers or even potentially Romeo Dunze. This is going to be on the table for the Jets. I threw out quarterback before because there are people down on Drake May now, apparently, and I think that's just crazy. I really do. But if you're New York, you have to be patient. You don't want to make a move now before the draft even comes up. If the Jets are going to make a move, it's got to be around the 8th overall pick. Because it's around the 8th overall pick that we are really going to see what kind of board the Jets are going to be working with. Everyone knows, at least for the most part, that the cornerback room isn't going to be touched in the top 10. Pass rushers probably aren't going to be touched in the top 10, depending on what Atlanta does. But again, we go through this projection piece. As of right now, I always do a mock a day before the draft. It's my only mock draft that I do. So for you guys that are wanting to read my content, stay tuned for that. But you want to project the starting 10, 11 overall picks. Caleb Williams is going 1. I think general consensus right now is Jaden Daniels goes 2. Drake May is going 3, whether that's to the Giants, whether that's to the Patriots, still up for debate. 4 with the Arizona Cardinals, most people expect will be Marvin Harrison. I still think if Minnesota's trading up, they're going to trade up with the Chargers and not Cardinals. Vikings take J.J. McCarthy. The Giants, if they stay packed at 6, would take Malik Neighbors. 7 is Joe Alt. 8 would either be Romeo Dunze or could be a defensive player. The Falcons need pass rusher, so let's throw in Dallas Turner. And then you have Romeo Dunze, Olu Fashanu, and Brock Bowers at 9 and 10. The big question is going to be, what do the Jets do if that scenario happens? The Chicago Bears were in this situation last year. They needed interior defensive pressure and had Jalen Carter fall to them at 9. They also needed offensive line help. They opted to get the offensive lineman over Jalen Carter. Philadelphia at 10 saw that Carter was falling and traded up to get him. I think it was a first and a third round pick. Very minuscule for a player of Carter's overall talent. If Odunze falls to 9, will Joe Douglas trade up to get him? I think the general consensus is that Brock Bowers, no matter what happens with the Bears pick at 9, Brock Bowers isn't going to be the pick. They've got plenty of tight ends. You don't need an overall guy. Just another tight end on their depth chart. They've got plenty. You need some wide receiver help on the outside. All that makes sense. But again, we've talked about this. We've said this before. If you're the Jets, let the draft come to you. Because sometimes when you allow that to happen, great things are available. Because let's say a left tackle needy team like the Cincinnati Bengals or the Philadelphia Eagles or the Dallas Cowboys come calling and say, we want the 10th pick, name your price. We'll give you a first, a second, and a fourth if it's Dallas. We'll give you a first and a second if it's Philly. If it's Cincinnati, we'll give you our first and second round pick. All these trades could happen. If you're the Jets, the value that you could get from Romeo Dunze or Olu Fashanu is great. The value can get from trading back, getting a second round pick, drafting Troy Fautanu, and taking a receiver like a Leggett, like a Ladd McConkey, that's pretty damn good. And you would have a third round pick. I continue to circle his name for the Jets because he's a guy that I would want Philadelphia to draft. But Christian Haynes out of Connecticut, he's my draft crush. I've said it so many times. He's a great player. I really like him. I think he'd work out well. Overall, there's a lot of different spots that the Jets can go. And what's interesting, because I did want to tie this to the beginning of the show when you guys were just jumping on, but with Our lads coming out with their Jets, the offensive line rankings, and ranking the Jets with the 10th group in the league, 10th overall, ahead of the Giants, the Jags, the Vikings, all these other teams. That's a damn good rating for them. But how much better would they be if Olu Fashanu or Troy Fautanu or Talise Fuaga are the selections in the first round, wherever they are? If the Jets take him at 10, if they trade back with Cincinnati or Philadelphia, pick up a second-round pick, get Christian Haynes and Fautanu, wouldn't that make a lot of sense? Wouldn't that only enhance the Jets' offensive line? People argue, and I was on this show when people were arguing about it. I was on the Jake Asman show when people were arguing about it. Jetcast, people were arguing about it. Who else? Played like a Jet. Scott and I went in on the type of caliber player he was. But Carter Warren needs to have a big second year. I think everyone understands that. If you don't trust Carter Warren to be your swing tackle, or you don't trust Max Mitchell to be your swing tackle, wouldn't Fautanu be the perfect player? Wouldn't he be the perfect player for the depth role? He's a starting caliber tackle. He's the starting caliber guard. He's a starter anywhere you put him. Wouldn't it make sense to enhance the offensive line? This is the argument I get with a lot of people, because as of right now, a large contingent of Jet fans, I would say 75% of them, are adamant that New York should take a skill position player with the 10th pick, whether it be Bowers, whether it be Odunze, it doesn't matter. Take a skill guy. That's the only consensus that I have heard. But if I really want to get down to the minutia of the organization, what's the best path forward? The best path forward is not the skill guy, it's the offensive line. Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, they're both free agents after this year. You need a plan at tackle, a long-term plan at tackle. And unless Drake May is available, the only player I feel is worthy of his draft status is Olu Fashanu. If Fashanu is there at 10, it's very hard for me to say the Jets should do anything else but take a tackle. If they trade back and it's between Troy Fautanu, Jackson Powers Johnson, whoever it is, Xavier Worthy, any of those receivers, Brian Thomas, it's still hard for me to argue against taking an offensive lineman with their first-round pick. You don't get many opportunities with a deep offensive line class like this. There are good receivers in almost every draft class. There are good quarterbacks in almost every draft class. There are good pass rushers in every draft class. You know what's hard? Judging good offensive linemen. We go back to 2022. Historically, one of the best classes for the Jets. The Jets were sitting there with a 4th overall pick, and they could have taken Evan Neal or Sauce Gardner. Consensus was to take Evan Neal because he was a can't-miss prospect with the 4th overall pick. The Jets went Sauce Gardner. They are absolutely throwing parties now because they made that pick. And yes, that tells you that not every great offensive line prospect is going to turn out well. But the inverse to that is this. When you know that an offensive line prospect is going to be great, you don't waste it. You don't tip it off to next year. Because we have no idea if that's still going to be the good player he was. Evan Neal is having to move to guard because he can't play at tackle. It's a whiff of a pick for Joe Shane and the Giants. It's an absolute whiff. If you're the Jets, you take an offensive lineman because you don't know how many good ones are going to be available. And if you're really in on a guy, it doesn't matter about the value that Romeo Dunze gives you this year. It doesn't matter about the value that Brock Bowers gives you this year. It matters about keeping Aaron Rodgers and the quarterback after him healthy. As of right now, we look at this offensive line class and we talk about value. I value Olu Fashanu as a prospect more than Brock Bowers and Romeo Dunze. If you're the Jets at 10 and you cannot get a second-round pick in trade talks, you take Olu Fashanu. You don't take Brock Bowers. You just don't. Question here from VR. In my opinion, the Bears in front of us at 9 is the biggest obstacle. In your opinion, who do you think they are looking at? Wide receiver, O-line, or defensive end? VR, I think you're asking about what the Bears are looking at, right? I want to make sure I get this right. But the one misconception, if that's the case, and I'll talk about it from the Bears' perspective, but the one thing that I think gets overlooked about Chicago is that this is a pretty damn good team. They are a very talented bunch. Matt Eberflus, for all we say about him not having a good offense, they have a good running game. The offensive line is very good. You've got quality receivers. And your defense for the last 2 years has been very underrated. That's a damn good defense they got down in Chicago. Damn good. What they need is wide receiver help. That's why I say, and again, I understand VR's point here, but if the Jets are holding out hope that Romeo Dunze is going to be available at 10, I don't think you're looking at the mocks correctly, because there are 3 receivers going before the Jets as of right now. Neighbors is going top 10. Harrison's going top 10. Odunze is going top 10. If the Giants trade up in the draft, this changes the conversation a little bit. But as of right now, they don't have the draft capital to make that kind of trade. All they can do is hope that J.J. McCarthy falls to them at 6 or Drake May falls to them at 6. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think in reality, it's going to be Williams, Daniels, May, McCarthy, or Harrison McCarthy, whichever way you want to put it. And if that's the case, the Bears are taking Odunze. They're not going to let a receiver, especially after drafting Caleb Williams, they are not letting a receiver, a quality one, a really good one with great size, good route running ability, and solid speed, they're not letting one walk to the Jets. It's just not going to happen. So I understand VR's point. The Bears do remain the Jets' biggest obstacle if the Jets want if they want a receiver. But if I'm the Jets, I don't want a receiver. I don't even feel like tight end's the biggest need. If I'm looking at the longevity of this team, you know Tyron Smith is not going to be healthy for a full 17 games. And everyone tells me that Carter Warren is not a good football player, never will be a good football player. Everyone tells me Max Mitchell is not a good football player, never will be a good football player. So if you have very little trust in the tackle depth behind Tyron Smith and behind Morgan Moses, isn't the tackle spot the perfect place to look at with the 10th overall pick? You have Garrett Wilson. You have your plethora of offensive weapons that you can trust. With Aaron Rodgers at the helm, it doesn't matter if Mike Williams is available week 1 or not. Tyler Conklin, Jeremy Ruckert, Garrett Wilson, and Breece Hall should be good enough to remain competitive in week 1 with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And yes, if Romeo Dunze and Brock Bowers, if those guys are in for the Jets, they absolutely help their offense in 2024. But what happens if Tyron Smith goes down for a season-ending injury or he gets hurt for 3 weeks? Everyone talks about, Tyron Smith, you got to hope he's healthy, but Carter Warren and Max Mitchell just aren't in. If that's the case, this isn't a discussion. If you guys really feel that Warren and Mitchell aren't good enough, then Olu Fashanu and Talite Fuaga are the picks. Or trade back in the draft and pick up Fautanu, and that's the pick. Under no circumstances, in my opinion, would it be smart for the long-term health of this franchise to take Odunze or Bowers at 10 and simply sit there and wait until the third round to draft your offensive lineman? This is a deep offensive line class. This is a very deep class. It's not good enough where you can draft one in the third round and say, oh, we have our starting tackle for next year. It's just not. If I'm the Jets, the clear-cut decision is to trade back in the draft, trade back, pick up a second rounder, and take Fautanu. If you don't want Fashanu. If you don't want Olu Fashanu, who, again, I think is a top 5 overall player in almost every other draft, the fact that this group is loaded tells me how good Fashanu is. He's a damn good football player, and the Jets would be significantly better both now and in the long term if they draft him. Consider this, guys. I'm going to leave this as my final point because it's almost 6 o'clock. You expect Mike Williams to be healthy later on in the season. You know Garrett, you know Brees, you know Conklin. All these guys are going to be great. If you're the Jets and you're sitting there week 15 and a win gives you the AFC East crown, a win sends you to the playoffs, but Tyron Smith is hurt, who would you want protecting Aaron Rodgers' blind side? Carter Warren, Max Mitchell, or Olu Fashanu? Everyone tells me Warren and Mitchell aren't good players. Everyone tells me they are lost causes. If they are truly lost causes, then everyone should be on board with Olu Fashanu being the pick at 10. Everyone. Yes? We shall see. It's a Monday edition of Football with Faria. Thank you guys so much for jumping on. I'll be back on Wednesday. Same time, same place. Appreciate all of you guys for jumping on. If you guys are new to the program as well, like, share, and subscribe. All the help and all the support is obviously greatly appreciated. And again, like I said, I will have updates on what I'll be doing on draft night, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So appreciate all of you guys for jumping on, and I will see you all on